So welcome, it's Dena Churchill, Innovator in Health and Wellness, and today is, what day is it? Wednesday, November 4th, 2020, and we're doing a Zoom meeting. Thank you to everybody who's arrived in the chat box, and I'm wearing the hat of Convener of the Atlantic Assembly and doing this as Zoom with Kevin Annett, who's going to be on the call this evening. We're going to be talking about the Nation of Kanata, our assemblies, and also the Indigenous, and how that all kind of links together into a bigger purpose. We'd love you just to keep your mics muted, your videos off during the recording. And if you do have questions, some other people coming into the chat box now, if you could write them down and just hold your questions until the end, about halfway through, 30 minutes in, we'll take a look at the chat box and questions. Kevin, let's do something different tonight. Would you introduce me and you? Very quick, you know,
how do I introduce Dena? There's no words that describe Dena.
Just something really quick and exciting. I hate going through this spiel.
Dena put her job and livelihood on the line just like I did. So we're kind of twin flames here, and I really honor her sacrifice, and you know the way that we set that path. You know, there's an old saying, I forget who said it, but the seeker of truth eventually becomes the path that others can walk on, right? And I think of that when I meet people like Dena who are willing to put everything on the line, because that's what it's going to take when we learn how to not hold back what needs to be done in our own lives. So anyway, that's my best description of Dena tonight. And me, well, I don't know. I've always have a difficulty when it comes to describing myself because, you know, my 25 years has been pretty much an open book. You can read about it online. Of course, some things you read online are put up by RCMP division in Vancouver, Black Ops division, so I wouldn't necessarily believe everything. But urge people, especially for the discussion tonight, murderbydecree.com tells a lot of the history of the movement to expose genocide, which led naturally to the efforts to set up common law courts because the Crown courts were absolving church and state of their own crimes, and eventually to a republic, which is the need to replace this genocidal, criminally convicted Crown authority with that of our own, a post-colonial arrangement where we can really not just talk about having justice between our different nations, but how do we establish it? And that actually leads into one of the main things I wanted to talk about tonight, which was the Constitution. Now, I sent a copy of the draft, the latest draft that's come out for the Constitution for a Republic. The plan is to hold a constitutional convention April 15th to 18th, 2021. So we've got about 6 months. We want everyone to start looking over this draft, make amendments, suggestions. I don't know if you sent it everyone, Dena, but it will be coming out, I'm sure, soon. And you might notice there's 10 articles in it having to do with what is a republic, how does it govern the former territory of Canada, you know, how do we see the different nations, Quebec, Indigenous nations. The idea basically is a federation of equal nations operating together. And how does that work? There's a section on the law and liberty, the fact that common law is the only legal system recognized, a discussion of the economy and land, public service, church and state, foreign affairs, and other powers. The idea is that the people would elect from the local assemblies, they would elect a Congress, where the people have no special privileges. Any member of Congress could be recalled at any time by a majority recall. And what goes with that Constitution is Section 2, which is a Charter of Liberty, where we lay out 12 fundamental liberties that cannot be revoked by the law. They're inherent, and no emergency power or anything can ever revoke any of these liberties. Third section is a Proclamation of Independence that actually came out 5 years ago in Winnipeg, and it was revised recently. But that all three of those are in the those documents that Dena has, and you will all see. Now, one thing I would suggest is that you all read it carefully, make notes, and have a special meeting wherever you are to go over that and to just talk about it. It's a very exciting process because it's really imagining what a new nation would look like. How would it operate? what are the old stuff we want to get rid of? What are the things we want to retain? And how do we empower the people to take power into their own communities? So it's a very exciting process formulating a constitution. Now, I know there's other groups in the country that are doing that. We don't see our efforts as in a competitive spirit at all. Everyone is contributing to this. Our process is we believe it has to come from the grassroots, which is why we're farming out this draft constitution all over to anyone who's either taken out citizenship already in the Republic or is active in one of the assemblies. So that's kind of the general take on that. And if people have questions or anything about that, one section that we do want to get into too is the whole relationship with Indigenous nations. And you know, I know there's some people on the call who might have their own ideas about that, being Indigenous. So you know, we're welcoming all of those comments. Maybe I should leave it at that. Dena, what do you think?
Well, first off, I did forward it to the people that were working on kind of our vision and constitution. So we had kind of a small working group, but I haven't emailed it to the full assembly yet. But if I might make a few comments,
Yeah.
I think the first little bit is a nice thing to read out for people who haven't seen it yet. The Constitution of Sovereign Republic of Kanata. We, the people of Kanata, gathered in solemn and lawful assembly, ordain, I love that word, establish this constitution to ensure our common liberty, provide for our mutual defense, secure justice, overcome the legacy of colonialism and genocide, and promote the health and welfare of all our peoples. So I felt that was nice, but I did have a comment. I don't know if now is the time to kind of bring it forward or not.
Yeah, why not?
I love the foreign ownership of the economy of Kanata is prohibited. It talked in Article 6 about the Republic citizenship. Now, I've known we've had that conversation before about citizen, and I have an idea. Instead of, I mean, because you talk about later on in the article, section 3, Sovereign Republic of Kanata. So if we called, you know, if we could say we're sovereigns, you know, so instead of citizens of Kanata, what about if we entertained sovereigns in the nation? I just thought it might be more congruent, you know, to keep, you know, anyway. So but I loved it, you know, and I can see the power and the time and the history that, you know, it's 10 pages long. You know, it's truly, it's an amazing document. So I've just been, they were my kind of initial thoughts having read through it. And I love that Kanata is a Six Nation term, meaning where the people of the villages sit as equals around the council fire. So it's a beautiful document. And like I said, our working group has it, but the entire membership will have it by the end of the week. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Tina. And specific amendments and ideas, if you write to Republic of Kanata Genius at Proton Mail, just put attention Constitution Committee, and they are going to take every amendment and put it in their central bank and farm out all the ideas to everybody once a lot of the amendments come in, so it's a continual work in progress. So all of your ideas are important. We want to hear from everybody about this. That's what grassroots means, right?
So maybe could you put that the email? Is it the Republic of?
Oh yeah. Well,
and then attention to Constitution. While you're doing that, maybe I will just talk about what the update of what happened. So last week I said I went to the Avon River, where there were Mi'kmaq grandmothers that had been sitting for 150 days next to this Windsor Causeway, and it's a dam that prevents the fish from spawning, and they're in peaceful, not really demonstration, expression, let's say, doing sacred ceremony and praying not only for the dam to be lifted and saving the fish, but also for the politicians to make a decision. And you know, I was really inspired by it. It was the most amazing thing that I've seen, you know, these grandmothers for that time. But Sandy Tony, who's a Mi'kmaq grandmother, just had a statement that she put out yesterday, and I'd like to read it because I think it's significant. The Inner Bay of Fundy Salmon Run is almost past time, and it's willfully being single-handedly blocked by Minister Bernadette Jordan. By blocking a ministerial order already on her desk and now signed, it's been there for at least 2 weeks. So this is a SARA listed species, political interference on the indigenous right. This is a political interference on the Fisheries Act and SARA. She has sworn to uphold and shows why a politician cannot be placed in the top of the Department of Fisheries. So in the post that I did, I said the fish of our land would thank you kindly if you would, find it in your heart to share this post or email Bernadette Jordan directly to question the crime in this delay. So, I'll address her as honorable when she lifts the dam or builds a bridge and lets the fish through. But I think that might be an action step for any of the locals, because Bernadette is holding that up. And, like I said, the spawning is almost finished for the year. So that was kind of, and again, these are heredity chiefs. So maybe that'd be a good time if you could explain, Kevin, the difference between kind of the Indian Act chiefs and the heredity chiefs, because it was a heredity chief that was sitting for 150 days.
Like, there's different variations across the country because colonialism in Canada spread in waves west, and it lasted over centuries. So it had different expressions, but basically the Indian Act was brought in 1874. Still in effect. When you live on reservation, you're not a citizen, you're a ward of the crown. So it's a catch-22 Native people are in. To get benefits, you have to live on reservation, but then you're a ward of the state, which is the same legal status as a child or a mentally incompetent person. You're not autonomous. You can't even open a bank account. So it's a servitude kind of condition. And in that situation, it's one of the reasons that there's no legal consequence when a policeman takes a gun and shoots an Indian. They're usually, when Mounties do this all the time in Vancouver, they're not even reprimanded half the time because Natives are in a different category of citizenship. In fact, it's the category that now applies to all of us under the COVID measures. They're just applying the Indian Act to all of us. So it's a situation of extreme importance for everybody in Kanata, because it means that we have to understand what's being done to our brothers and sisters to know what's happening to us now. So it's a practical use for all of us. It's not just a moral or political or spiritual issue. It's one of practical need now for us to learn these things. Indian Act chiefs were set up I know the example in Ontario, in 1922, they brought in a law that said no other political organization in Native culture will be recognized except chief and council. So what the chief and council was, they would, in many Native societies traditionally, they were matrilineal, run by, like in Quebec and in the Mohawk and the Six Nations territory, you had clan mothers, which are still in effect. In fact, I worked with some of the clan mothers when we did the dig at Brantford to unearth the remains of children in a mass grave near the Brantford Anglican Residential School there. It was the clan mothers who authorized it against, and here's a perfect example, the clan mothers authorized our dig. Bill Montour, who was head of chief of the Six Nations Confederacy, that's the government-funded, government-recognized chiefs, he was against it because he was called off to Ottawa and he got his instructions, because the chief and council was an artificial system brought in. A few families you get all the money and they have all the political authority on the reservation, and they suppress everybody else, especially the traditionalists. So there's that divide you find in every reservation. Traditional people who often end up getting terrorized off the reserve or live in town somewhere, and the chief and council, which was really, they're an arm of the government. They're trustees of the government. You read in the Indian Act, all land is vested in the Crown. Okay, so Native people on reservation don't own their own land. They're administering it for the Crown, which is an old system the British Crown did. They did the same thing in Ireland to my ancestors there. They would set up a tribal chief. They would conquer him and then reissue his authority under their control. So in other words, Native chiefs are direct puppets of the Governor General, Privy Council. And they do what they're told. We learned that the hard way. We tried to get the Native chiefs on board to expose these crimes of genocide, and they, to a man or woman, every one of them opposed what we're doing because they were told to by the government. Also, when they were kids in the residential school, they were often collaborators. They would rat out the other kids, get better treatment for informing on the other children. So, I mean, the kids were cultivated that way deliberately. They were in the protected group, and those protected children often went on to become chief and tribal council or the band council. So it was that system set up of divide and conquer right from the beginning. And it works very effectively now. It's a $9 billion industry, Indian affairs. And we figure barely 1% of that ever trickles down to people on reservation. It's eaten up by, 40% of it is eaten up by the government, another 40% by the chiefs and their families. So it's a very corrupt, violent system. And we find that the people who we work with, they can't live on a reservation, or they're too targeted. My friend Peter Yellowquill, he's a traditional Anishinaabe or Ojibwe elder in Long Plains Reservation and near Brandon, Manitoba. I went once to a band council meeting with him, and he challenged Dennis Meaches, who is the local chief, for dealing all the drugs. And this is quite common. They'll deal drugs, even traffic children on the reserve. The Mounties look the other way because they're told to by the government. The chiefs can do whatever the hell they want. He got up and challenged Dennis Meaches. The next week, his trailer got burned. Peter Yellowquill's trailer got burned out. RCMP never investigated. Then his sons were picked up and thrown in jail. You're targeted immediately in the system when you're on reserve and you speak out. So a lot of the people who we work with are off reserve, but that's where 3/4 of natives are now. But they're suffering. They don't have access to benefits. They're prey to a death rate and a level of disease which is worse on average than natives in Guatemala. The infant mortality rate among native children is somewhere like 58 in the world. If you take natives on reservation or off reserve and look at their standard of living, it's somewhere down around like an Africa or Central American country. So this is the reality of what we're dealing with, like a colonized nation within our own nation, and still prey to all of the genocide and all those techniques. So I know it's a long way to answer your question, but that's the makeup right now. It's this dual nation of government-funded chiefs and everybody else. And that was very much created in the residential schools, really.
No, that's great. I think it's really important to have that history. It really helps me sort of understand the paradigm. And I listened to your radio show this week where you had talked about, the torture. You, I guess, given clips of the unrepentance, and where, kids were electrocuted and pencils stabbed in their hands. And, it was just horrific. I mean, I had to kind of skip over some of that because it tears your heart apart to know that was sanctioned by our government and by the church, to put snakes in their bath and, to rape them when they first came into the residential schools. I mean, that was under our Canadian government Indian Act. I mean, it was unbelievable. So I think it's important to kind of set that up. The question I had was an article that I'd seen in CBC, Canadian Brainwashing Corporation, say that because I was, anyway. But this was an article that, and first off, I know that the Indian Act chiefs were given $1,450,000,000 for Atlantic Canada, and there's 33 reserves that are living in third world conditions. But these, so when you say 9 billion, 1 billion of that came to Atlantic Canada. So anyway, so given that fact, then I see this article that was shared with me, and it's the Wolastoqey, or I don't know how to say it, WOLASTOQUEQEY Nation lawsuit to claim title to half of New Brunswick. So there's a picture there of these guys that are probably the Indian Act chiefs, right? So they are, like you said, politicians in Halloween gear. And I don't know what this would be, but if they're planning on, giving all this money and land to these chiefs, I mean, what could be why would they do that?
They don't. They don't. It's kind of like when Quebec politicians talk about separation. They don't actually want to separate. They just want to use that as a lever to get more money out of Ottawa and more benefits. And Native chiefs are very much like that. They don't want to take the land back. You have a few Indigenous sovereignist movements, especially out west, who call for that. But by and large, the Native chiefs just want more money out of Ottawa. And this is one of the levers. So if what you find is when people talk about land claims, it's governed by what's called the treaty system. And the treaty system, it's not a treaty, it's another false word, because a treaty is an equal nation to nation bilateral agreement, but these are not equal nations. They're all, the native tribes are subject to the crown, which means they have to take whatever they're given. And since all land is owned by the crown in this old system, then they can't get any actual land. They use it, for example, I was saying to you before the show, the biggest casino in America is owned by the Seneca of the Six Nations in New York. I've been to it. It's vast. It goes 3 blocks. It's this huge thing because the Native chiefs are heavily involved in organized crime, and they use gambling and everything as a means to, to profit themselves. The same chiefs that are, I remember when I first worked in Port Alberni, I went out to the local chief of the Nutchell Tribal Council, George Watts. We call him 5-Car George because he has these 5 limousines in the driveway. Meanwhile, half his people are lining up on the food bank line and they're sleeping on the streets of Port Alberni. And he had total contempt. He wouldn't even donate to our food bank at all. He had contempt for his own people. And you find that mentality is like, I know what's best for you. I have the right to all these privileges. It's the class divide and oppression on a reservation is even worse than you find in white society, right? And when you mentioned the government did this, United Church, Catholic Church, Anglican Church did these horrendous crimes decade after decade, full knowledge and approval of the Native chiefs. It's like they make a deal. They say, we won't harm your kids if you bring in the rest of the kids into the residential school. They've been making these deals from the beginning. So the whole land claims thing is yet another one of those deals, right?
Mm-hmm. So what can we do locally? I mean, how can we challenge this? Maybe this is just a money grab. I just ask everybody to make sure your video's off and that your mic is muted as you're coming in. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We've got the Edmonton, Greater Edmonton Common Law Assembly representation from Toronto, from all over, so UK. So again, thanks for being here. But so Kevin, I did post the link, the CBC link to that article about the nation lawsuit to claim half the land in New Brunswick. What can we do as the Atlantic Common Law Assembly to, bring attention to this?
Well, I mean, we find out west, it's in a way easier out west because there's a lot more Indigenous people. In the east, there isn't the presence as much, especially in the Maritimes. I mean, for example, there was only one residential school in Shubenacadie in Nova Scotia. Catholics ran it. But make contact with people. It's all about relationships, but do not ever, well, you wouldn't be invited on anyway, but do not go into a reservation and start trying to talk to people about this. It's dangerous for them and it's dangerous for you, frankly. You got to seek out people like the folks down at the river there, traditionalists, get their advice, ask them, their story, and if they want to share it. Because I remember the first thing ever said to me was, you whites are always asking us for our story. How about your story? We want to hear about yours. Like, why did you come here? Why did you do these crimes to us? Why haven't you taken responsibility for them? Those kinds of things. So it's got to be an equal kind of, we've got to, like in out west, often this whole issue comes up of a relationship to the Indigenous nations. And I've been told over many years that from Native people that they're not going to take us seriously until we take our own crime seriously, put our own people on trial, which we tried to do, right? But unless we're willing to do that, why should they trust us? Why should they work with us? It's you got to earn trust, and it's got to be done usually through your own loss, your own sacrifice, rather than the do-gooder come in and trying to fix things, right? Which is not the way to go. So anyway, I would do that. Find out people on the ground who are willing to talk about these things and learn from the grassroots, because you're not going to get any knowledge of this working through the official Native. It's a very tightly controlled system. Native politicians, they're on the leash in a huge way.
I did send an email to a lawyer who, a member from New Brunswick had recommended, that works on treaty law, and sent her the article and asked if, I could speak with her. Because what I learned is in 1985, November, the Supreme Court of Canada held up a treaty of 1952. And September 1997, the Supreme Court upheld the Treaty of 1762. So do you think it's worth sort of, looking at that from under kind of the corporation legal entity? I
mean, it's good to educate yourself, and it's, like the 1763 treaty, which it was after the French Indian Wars, and King George granted the Six Nations in the East title to their land. And it's been held up in some court cases as an example that preceded Confederation, therefore Native people's title to their own land is recognized. But no, it was nullified by the Indian Act in 1874 that said all land and authority is vested in the Crown. People don't have an identity and nationhood in the Crown system, right? So I noticed Iron Crow made a comment, the Constitution of the USA has a lot of merit. In fact, the draft Constitution, which Dena has, that you're all going to see, was modeled very deliberately on the US Constitution. And that's because it's a federal system where power tends to devolve down to the states. It's not a centralized authority, although unfortunately the system of President, Senate, and Congress was set up deliberately to model the British monarchical system, where the president was like the king, the Senate is the House of Lords, Congress is the Commons, House of Commons. In the original Jeffersonian system of Republican democracy in America, there was to be no president. The office of the president is just a holdover from monarchy or papacy, or however you want to see it, that one person is the authority. No, that goes against the whole notion of a republic. So that should be borne in mind when we're talking about the American Constitution. But it was kind of like ours will be. It'll be a compromise of all sorts of different influences, right?
So Kevin, you had mentioned, that we're sort of under the Indian Act now. Is it because we're in a state of emergency, and in that state of emergency, we lose our human rights and freedoms?
You don't have to be in a state of emergency to lose that in Canada. You just need the Governor General pass an order in a council saying you're that way, because you're not citizens, you're subjects of the Crown. They can remove these privileges that they call the Charter of Rights. Those are 4 rights which, under Roman law, which is what they're operating from, they're conditional privileges that the monarch can take away at any point. So they didn't even have to declare. I don't think Justin even declared a state of emergency when he brought in the COVID measures. They just did it because 2/3 of the laws in Canada are already done that way. They're done order in council. They're never even debated in Parliament. So it's just more of the same, really, right?
I have a question. A few people have sent me a request maybe to have a draft of the Constitution. Is that just available for our members, or is it, because on this call we have some members, some non-members, is the Constitution available for anybody, or do you have to be active in an assembly and or be a Kanata?
Yeah, you can't just, if somebody shows up, I wouldn't hand them one. They have to have either been active in the assembly or a citizen, a sworn citizen of the Republic.
Okay, so if anybody's checking in, if you'd like to become a member, we put, if you scroll up, you'll see our website, and you can register through our website and be connected to people in our assembly. And we do have representatives who are managing kind of our Kanata citizenship. Kirsten's here on the line. If you want to put in your information, Kirsten, feel free. And if you're, visiting from another part of the country, please feel free to put your contact information. I know we have convener of different assemblies. We have Edmonton Assembly. I think Carla came in.
Victoria. Hi, Fiona.
Victoria, there's Paul in Toronto. So again, if you want to announce your assembly, please put your contact information so people know how to reach you. That'd be great. Kevin, the other thing was from your radio show, you talked about, pain being a great teacher. But there was something on there, there was a lady, I don't remember her name, and she said she had to bury her love so they couldn't steal it from her.
Yeah.
You know, the
That
pain.
was one of the women interviewed in our documentary Unrepentant. Joan Morris said that.
I mean, it's so disturbing, really, you know, that this happened, and that the government, you know, it was all under this Indian Act. So I think that's important, as you say, to understand where we've came from, and to understand that this is not new. They've been taking kids out from parent homes and doing strange things to them. And there was also a comment in your radio show about the experiments that they did on people in hospitals. Was
Oh
that
yeah,
under the Indian Act as well, where they kept them in a hospital? You mentioned in the talk that you did at that university that there was a lady who was in the hospital for 15 years being a medical experiment.
oh, that was common. That was Joan Morris and her mom in the Nanaimo Indian Hospital. They right after we held our first tribunal about this in Vancouver, 1998. Within a few months of that, the federal government officially sealed all of the records to the Indian hospitals and what was called the Defense Research Board, which conducted a lot of these medical experiments using, especially after World War II, they used a lot of Nazi doctors in experiments. I've talked to Native women who said the doctor who experimented on them had a tattoo right here, because that's where the SS would tattoo their people, right? There are SS doctors working all over Canada in these Indian hospitals, conducting the mind control experiments that they pioneered in the death camps, and which are now being used in our techniques deployed against all of us. But no, the Indian hospitals were often attached to the residential schools. They were on military land, anything you can imagine, enormous death rate. We've identified mass graves of these children near them. But it was just common practice to use Native people this way. Mandatory vaccinations were the norm going back to 1874. It's been the law against Indians. You cannot refuse medical treatment or force vaccinations or you go to jail. I've worked with a lot of health workers who say it's common practice for Health Canada to come in and just shove needles in the arms of little babies on reservations, and the mom can't refuse, and the Mounties arrest her. So, I mean, this has already happened. It's been happening for many years, and it's kind of a wake-up call. And, you know, to me, just at a human level, the big question that's never been answered or even addressed in Canada is, how could we have done it in the first place? I mean, just as human beings. Because it's not like people didn't know what was going on. I mean, you know, I remember when I was 15, I went to Greece one summer with a friend, and we were living in this little place in one of the islands, and down the road, or about half a mile, there was this dead sheep carcass. You could smell that for miles, that one rotting sheep. Imagine living near a school where half the children were dying every year, and those are the official statistics, deliberately starved to death, and exposed to smallpox and TB and then never treated. That was one of the main reasons it was an enormous death rate. They were depopulating whole areas using these schools. Now, what they normally did is they would bury them en masse, but after a while they would burn the bodies. John Zimmerman, the principal at the Mush Hole in Brantford, where we did the dig, he wrote a letter in 1949 that said, "We're now forced to bury children 2 or 3 to a grave," right? But they would incinerate a lot of them. So don't tell me that the people in that community didn't know there were children dying in those places. But it's like everyone's acting now like, oh, really? We didn't know this? Well, we didn't want to know it. Our parents didn't want to know this. We didn't want to know it. And now we're reaping the consequence. So, I mean, you could call that a kind of a judgment or a justice, but what you do to your neighbor, it'll happen to you. And there has to be a real soul searching. And that's the idea of, like, a republic is not just, okay, we're going to have a new political arrangement. There should be a renaissance here going on. There should be a reformation of our conscience and our morals to prevent that kind of shit from ever happening again. Mm-hmm. I mean, I couldn't belong to Canada. When I learned this stuff, I was not a Canadian anymore. There's no way I would identify with Canada after that. That's what led me down this road, but among other things. But anyway, sorry for the long sermon, but all of that was necessary to, it's all connected, all of this stuff, right?
I think a good point too is not just what you do to others, it's going to come back on you, or what you don't do, but it's what we do to the matrix, right? It's what we do to our environment. You know, we spray our forests and we put glyphosate in our drinking water, it comes back on us too. So whatever we were putting out there into the energy, right, whether it's to people or to the environment, it all comes back. There was something else I wanted to mention. You talked about a casino, which reminded me, I was privy to some information that Deborah Robinson, who's one of the biggest Indian Act chiefs here in Nova Scotia, plans to put a Hilton down in Yarmouth. So part of that $1,400,000,000 is not going to the you know, reserves. It's to put a Hilton in Yarmouth County. Anyway, crazy. So what can we do, you said, to make public? So to, you know, if we have this article, is to, I posted it on my Facebook, and with the other article, the local Avon River, I made sure I, you know, sent a letter to Department of Fisheries, to Bernadette Jordan. What else can we do?
Well, you know, this is the only book ever published in Canada with the unvarnished truth about this genocide in it. Not even the Native chiefs, of course, not even them will ever print this stuff. This is the information. We published it right after the bogus Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where they were ordered not to include testimonies of the death of a child. It was a very censored report. And everything they censored out is in here. This should be in the curriculum. We should be approaching teachers and getting this taught to the next generation. You know, we've talked in the assemblies about the need for our own homeschooling, our own education system. If we don't include that in our curriculum, teaching the real history of genocide in Canada, you know, forget it. That's got to be essential to the new curriculum that we bring in, you know, as a republic, as a people. So I think sharing that and the DVDs, this is also all on DVD because it was submitted to the International Common Law Court in Brussels when they found Ratzinger and Elizabeth and all those other guys guilty. It was based on that kind of evidence. So I think getting that out, teaching our people, especially the younger generations, about the truth of what Canada is, right, and was.
So thank you for that. We'll take some questions now as we're coming down. So if I've missed it up above, you know, copy and paste. We've got Carla putting in her information, who's the chair of the Greater Edmonton Common Law Assembly. Dena is the administrator for Vancouver. So thank you for putting in your information so I can call it out here on the Zoom, and so people know, you know, who's connected to Kanata and who's not, because we have a lot of lookalikes showing up in certain places. But our justice and legal person, who is Tara, who's on the call, had asked about COVID measures, and we sent out a video this week about how to decline any of the COVID measures, you know, masks, temperature checks, and vaccines. I'd like to kind of just read out these questions, Kevin, and get your thoughts on them. So in this one video, it talked about, you know, declining instead of refusing, and then questions that you can pose to the person trying to mask you or vaccinate you or, you know, doing a temperature check would be, are you medically qualified to do this? Do you hold any liability insurance? Can you advise of the ingredients either in the vaccines, which are toxic as we know, or in the masks, you know, Teflon in the masks and peroxides that are now causing lung cancers? So if you can ask, you know, throw it back to them, what qualifications do you have to inject or to mask or take a temperature? I mean, these are medical tests. Are you a medical person? Are you familiar with you know, any double-blind safety studies when it comes to vaccine? Can you explain the data? May I hold you personally liable for damages? Or is your employer or company willing to pay for damages? Do you stand by this product? And again, will you accept liability? And are you prepared to sign a statement of liability to compensate me if I'm injured? Do you have any thoughts on that or anything to add?
I do. I know Dana just sent a question about the Constitution draft, so I don't want to lose that. But on this, it's really straightforward from our end. And we've talked about this before, the notices of liability. You just show them the law from September 4th passed saying these COVID measures are now unlawful. And under this jurisdiction, we don't have to abide by it. The 1947 Nuremberg Code requiring informed consent. The thing is, the people who are pushing the mask and that have been told they're legally exempt from any consequence. And I know that from several of the people who are working in the medical field. I've been told that you're, in the same way the politicians and big pharma indemnify themselves so you can never sue them, like what just happened in BC. The lieutenant governor now is above the law and can bring in any law and you can never sue him for it. Same thing. They're told, people on the ground have said, you'll never be sued for this. So saying that to them, they're going to feel smug and say, well, you can't touch me anyway, so what does that matter? But it doesn't mean they can't be touched. You got to be able to know that. Don't ever say anything you're not able to back up, even psychologically. Even if you can't perform arrests at this point or whatever, psychologically, you've got to know how to take them the next step, which is you're liable, under our jurisdiction, right?
So you wanted to get back to Dena's question. Hi, Dena and Kevin. And Dena, again, is with the Vancouver Assembly, the administrator. If we need clarification on the meaning of statements, who do we ask? Like Article 5, 100% taxes is imposed on wealth gained by interest and speculation. What exactly does this mean? We need more specific info on how this would work.
Well, bankers and stock market guys, they speculate a lot in the financial world. They accrue enormous wealth. The banks in America that got away with ripping off the whole population, massing all of this through fraudulent means. It's to basically expropriate that wealth and say it's completely parasitic on people. It's not helping us, so we're going to tax it. All right. It's that. Now the whole thing about tax, it's evolved. It's mellowed a little bit. And there's aspects of the Constitution that are changing because of the input of people, right? So that's kind of generally what that means. But it's a good point. We need to define our terms. The Constitution doesn't provide definitions at this point because we know that people have different understandings of the same word. So we want to create a kind of a way to debate all that. So we learn the meanings, because like the English language has multiple meanings for the same word, and we have to know about that. So anyway, we can, in our discussions of the Constitution and our study groups and within the assemblies, we'll address those points more.
And Gerald's asking, have you seen or watched the letter from the Archbishop Vigano's letter to President Trump?
Yeah, I did.
And what are your thoughts on the election?
Well, I could be crude, but I won't. I think, okay, first on the whole Archbishop thing, we saw this before. People within the system come forward and they get a lot of media attention, and they are saying things that many other people have been saying for a long time, but because an Archbishop says it, suddenly it's important and news. Nobody within that system is guilt-free in the sense that everyone takes an oath of allegiance to the Pope and to a policy called crimen solicitatis, which means when children are raped, the police are not to be told. Every Catholic priest, bishop, anybody in the world, you can't be in the Catholic Church without going along with that. I mean, that's one example. So the words are fine, but you got to think, who is it coming from and what is the intent? And that's, I just always ask people to put it in a bigger context. I think whoever wins the election, the corporatocracy wins. Both Trump and Biden serve the corporatocracy. Trump himself ordered 300 million vaccine doses from AstraZeneca, the same company in England that Trudeau ordered it from. It's like they're hand puppets, and it's designed to divide America. You notice how close the vote is? Right down the middle, 50-50. Almost exact. Same number of electoral college votes, same number, about 1 million votes apart. It's designed to create permanent factionalized civil war in America. So Americans are fighting each other, and guess who's going to pick up the pieces? I mean, geopolitically, China is engineering a lot of this. Half of the politicians in Washington are on Beijing's payroll. I mean, that's a safe bet. They own half the debt in America now. So we have to look at the bigger picture here, and not whether you're pro or anti Trump or Biden or Democrat or Republican. They're meaningless terms. It's that left-right, one-dimensional political spectrum we're all supposed to stay on and not think interdimensionally, if you know what I mean. Anyway.
Thank you for that. Carla asked about the questions that I just read out. So I posted the video where you'll find those questions, Carla. They're on a screenshot towards the end. So that's in the comment section. And I'll also post it on the YouTube video for people who might be watching from YouTube. So thank you for your thoughts on the election. Any other questions for Kevin on Kanata, I'm just going to scroll back to see if I have any more. Teresa Tam, yes, Teresa Tam is calling now for 3 layers of masks. So there was no evidence, for 1 layer, but now 3 are somehow going to decrease your oxygen 3 times.
Let's suffocate everyone, yeah. Literally suffocate everyone.
Really, that's what I said in a post I did today. I said, it's really a crime, right? I mean, and you know what I wonder about, though? I mean, so the politicians are buying it, but I wonder about the people that are going to do this. Like, how are they brainwashed into thinking, putting 3 layers of masks? Like, I don't know. It's unbelievable. Has Kevin checked out brand new tube? It's all banned and censored light warriors brand.
No, but is that what it's called? New tube?
New tube? I haven't heard of it either, Brent. Maybe you could put a link in or something for us.
All right. Yeah.
And Bonnie Henry used to work, oh wait, no, I lost that. Bonnie Henry used to work for Gates and still does, so I didn't know that.
She had Canadian military background too.
That's interesting. Brand new tube. Okay, brand new tube. Okay, maybe we have to look at that. There's a few people who just posted it in there. Any other questions? We have about 15 minutes left. Kevin, do you have any summary thoughts? Maybe to kind of summarize where Kanata and the assemblies and the Indigenous all fit together.
Well, like I say, it's a work in progress, and it's what really matters so much is the work we do on the ground with people, and we're making enormous progress in one way, and then a lot of attack coming from the other, especially out west. And so we've had to reorganize the way we operate, so that, for example, I'll give you an example in Vancouver. We had this big assembly, 2 of them, greater like Fraser Valley and Vancouver, and they went through the usual disintegration of divide and conquer, infiltrators, spreading all sorts of rumors. So what we did, we basically set up a leadership cell of 3 people. And those people now are going to interview everybody and put them in one of 3 categories. There's people who are just interested, who are like the outer periphery. They want to learn more. There's people who want to take up citizenship, and then they go through a citizenship school where they can learn the fundamentals and then form cell groups of 3 who can start doing action and education and stuff together. And the 3rd category they recruit to is leadership. People who are, like the folks on this call who are informal, they want to take on formal leadership. And then they undertake sheriff training, convener training on that. And they were the ones who, along with the people in citizenship, can be delegates to the Constitutional Convention in April. So we want to get that going right away. We find that that's the best way to navigate situations when you're really under attack. Now, I don't know the details of how much people in the Maritimes have faced that. From what I've seen and heard, it isn't as much, but at some point when you get big enough, it'll happen to you as well. And, we've got to be able to fall back on the cell structure, and creating 100 brush fires all over that is harder for them to put out rather than putting everything in one basket, which can be sabotaged easily. So that's been part of the experience in the West. But generally speaking, it goes in waves, but there's too many people offering to volunteer to keep up with. That's the level of interest across the country in what we're doing. And, we have a tremendous potential here. Over half the people in Canada in an opinion poll want a republic. We've mentioned that time and again. So, we have a huge base of support. It's just a matter of plugging into it and keep going all the time, right?
So Ernest is asking about communicating between the assemblies across Kanata.
Right here.
Kevin has been
a good way to do it.
Yeah, Kevin has been great at networking, so we have other assemblies, probably 4 or 5 at least on this call right now, conveners and administrators. So we're all sort of connecting that way, which I find has been a great strength. So if we have somebody show up from Vancouver, that kind of happened in our stream, we can connect them with Dena, as I did today with Brent, so who's on the call too. So that's been helpful.
I noticed Vonda said, when is the Atlantic Commonwealth Assembly doing this training? She hasn't heard anything about that. So I'll just let Dena or somebody else answer that, but I think that's important. Like the question of training is a really important thing, but what it consists of and how we do it, we're still working out. But
yeah, and we've had December, had a note in the email that went out, but December, Michelle and Kirsten are working on a kind of a workshop event, a 2-day event, and we're still sort of structuring what that will look like. Dana has a question there, so thank you, Vonda, for that. From within our current constitution, can we see other active current laws by other assemblies in Kanata? So we don't have any, I can, right now, unless Tara, who's our legal person, is working on something. I don't know that we have any. We're just sort of finding our land legs. I was going to say sea legs, but let's say land legs. But I think it was Carla had shared some things with me from Edmonton, but can you answer that, Kevin?
Carla says she has a solution to help integrate the assemblies as well, implementing in the coming weeks. So welcome that, Carla. If you want to share that at some point, we can talk about that.
Wearing a mask is participating in assisted suicide. Yes, that's true. I also think it's just a sign of our submission to the agenda. It's a muzzle. Thanks, Tara, put in that link for Brand New Tube. We'll have a look. Coronavirus, what are we doing to our children? Okay, that's great. I'll include that too when we upload it. Any other questions? We've got about 10 minutes left. There's that link again. Nice, thank you. Iron Crow wants to make a suggestion. Should we strive to make all or any of our constitutions, paperwork, processes, structures as simple as possible? Simple is better and will help to implement our new systems.
Yeah, I think especially when the way we communicate with this to people, there's the kind of the legal lawful end of how it's got to be constructed, but then you can translate that into a popular, doing good propaganda, doing good education among people. There's a real skill to it, and you've got to use language people can understand, use terms they can relate to, and that's a real art. So we need to do that translation of what we're talking about here into the language of, quote, the ordinary people, although I don't think that 85% who tend to go along with stuff habitually and don't know how to critically think, I don't think that's who we're going to be drawing on initially. It's going to be 15%. And we find that right here, in the people we're working with right here.
And Paul is the person who checked in from the Greater Edmonton Common Law Assembly. And I know Paul does a lot of teaching on common law, and I've heard you do great work, Paul. So thank you for being here.
I'm sorry, I thought that was Carla.
I did too, but I think Carla is on here too as well. And focused on actions to squash COVID. This week, thank you, Tara. I actually sent our Unmask package and a copy of our laws to our Halifax police. So I had a conversation with them back in July when we were doing one of the Unmask rallies. Kevin, do you think that's a good idea for people to do everywhere, for sheriffs to connect with the police department and send them our laws? Or do you think it's, I don't know, what would you advise? I've already done it, so don't say.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's always useful to reach out to the police, but I don't think we should make it number one priority right now, because we need to organize ourselves first and be reaching out to people who we can recruit to swell the numbers of people who are going to stay in this, right? It's always psychologically reassuring to think, well, the police are on our side, right? But that's kind of a quick fix solution to think, well, we can get them on our side. Because I think our priority has to be, it's hard enough every day to keep our people going and to educate and train new people, and that is really where I believe the energy has to go. But I'm not poo-pooing that. I just think it's one consideration of many.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions? Start with 2 minutes. Do you see anything else up there, Kevin? Any other questions?
There was one about overeating and under-resting, but I'm not a good one to ask about that because I don't tend to sleep. So
I love intermittent fasting. It's a great way to kind of decrease your inflammation and spark up your immune system. So I love that. We have someone here in Edmonton that's working on a course for nutrition to help. Carla is here. I have been doing intermittent fasting too. Yes. Tara, great news.
Okay, here's the thing I should answer. Is there common ground between Unify the People and the Common Law Assemblies? In theory, yep. We've reached out to them. And initially, there's people who were in it who were friendly. In fact, they were involved in some of our assemblies on Vancouver Island. soon after the bylaw was passed in Parksville that banished COVID measures, Unified People's leadership came out and started attacking me and telling people to stay away from me and the Republic. Unify played a direct role in destroying the Parksville and Duncan assemblies on Vancouver Island. They went in and with the express intention of saying we're severing ties with Convener and the Republic without giving any reason, just in there kind of slash and burn. So I don't know why they do that. We're not launching a campaign against them or anything or denouncing them. We're just saying to people, you know, action counts louder than words. What we're doing on the ground, our focus is on organizing people to self-govern in their own assemblies in their own communities. And they have a different focus, and that's fine. But, you know, it's not a matter of counterattacking. It's a matter of asking, why would they do that? Why do they feel the need to attack horizontally instead of at the real enemy here, right? So unity is fine in theory. It's not, often doesn't measure out in practice. And I don't know why. I don't really want to get into that because I think it's a distraction. It's meant to be a distraction from what we need to be doing.
And Vonda says, yes, because we are the real enemy. That's true, isn't it? You know, we can create our own distractions and our own obstacles. So you can think if there's any closing remarks. We have kind of 5 minutes left, but I would just remind any of our members that are watching that we do have an in-person meeting on Friday, and that you can connect with Karen. I think Karen's on the line if you wanted to put your email address in there, Karen, for members, but the members have all been sent out an email anyway, so connect with Karen to confirm your attendance and also to get the directions. Kevin's books have arrived, the second shipment, so I'll have a box of books with me at the meeting. And also there's a freedom rally this weekend, Saturday, 1 to 3 at Victoria Park in Moncton, New Brunswick. So if you can remind each other, you know, get out there, support the cause, remind people that, you know, there's sane, sound, you know, people that believe in the goodness of humanity. So that's this Saturday, 1 to 3 in New Brunswick. And if you have anything that you want to post and want me to announce, you can put it in the chat box. If there's any freedom rallies, I know Brent, you had one, but I can't remember the details in Vancouver. So anyone wants to put that in. But Kevin, do you have any closing remarks?
Well, I just remembered Paul from Krista from Brighton, Ontario. They're in one of the assemblies there. I was talking to them earlier, and they too are talking about, is there another word we can use for citizen? And they had the idea of like a sovereign, like what you mentioned, Dena, sovereign in the Republic. But just a note on that, the citizen, and words can be used any way we like. We can reinvent words and reclaim them. So we can't be held up on this word means that, therefore we can't use it. Citizen traditionally is associated with a member of the Republic, as opposed to a subject, which is what you are in Canada, subject of the Crown. You're not subject to anything or anyone in a republic except your conscience and the law, which you help formulate. So that's traditionally the meaning of a citizen. And if you give that up, it's unclear whether then you're within a jurisdiction of a republic if you're just saying I'm a member, right? Mm-hmm. So that's something to keep in mind in that whole discussion.
Okay, thank you for that. And Brent has put up information. I can't click in your link right now. I'm afraid I will cut off the videos. So if you could just post the details. So there's a Freedom March in Halifax this Saturday, Frida. So if you could post where that is and what time it is, I'll be happy to announce it. Freedom Rally and March this Saturday, 1 p.m. Okay, thanks, Shannon. Shannon is our public relations person. Coordinator. So Halifax Freedom March this Saturday in Parade Square, which is down by City Hall. And only a few seats left for Friday. Karen, please put me on that. I haven't called yet, but Duncan Freedom Walk. So Brent, if you had the details to that, I know that's in Vancouver, but maybe the date and the time.
Duncan is probably, it's a community on mid Vancouver Island. It could be the reference to Duncan, BC.
Okay, good. So thanks again, everybody, for being here. So what, Kevin, you mentioned about the Constitutional Conference, right? The 15th to the 18th of April. What
Yep.
traits or what would you recommend in trying to kind of elect somebody from our assemblies? What traits or qualities are we looking for in that?
Well, we're looking for people who are obviously committed and who have a certain understanding already. You can't go to this without having read through that Constitution and make amendments and be interested in it so you can be part of the discussion, right? But don't forget, we're small enough now that we would encourage people who are sworn citizens of the Republic to come and attend. People should at this point have full voice and vote, you know, so maybe you can talk about that. We're just playing around with this idea how much we want to open up to everybody or have a delegate convention. The other thing people should know is there's 4 areas now where we want to simulcast and link everybody across the country. We're thinking of setting up these in Vancouver, Winnipeg, Ottawa, and Halifax. And that way you can be holding your own gatherings, but it can be broadcast so that we're all linked into the Constitutional Convention once. That, or have the main event in one of those 4 cities, but those are the 4 that has been put forward at this point.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. And I think that was everything, you know, just to kind of keep active. Thank you for being here, your inspired action.
Thanks to everybody. Carry it on.
Thank you. If you want to jump in and unmute and say goodnight, and then we can close out. But again, thanks to everybody for being here, because your comments and your questions really help kind of mold what we put out there to the public and what you can share them within your own individual assemblies. So again, we appreciate you.
Good night, everybody, from Wolf in Hansport.
Good night, Dana.
Good night from Ottawa.
Good night, Kevin.
Good night.
Good night, Kevin and Dana.
Good night.
Oh, my phone died.
I'm Crow from Wolfville.
It's like the Waltons, right? Good night, John Boy.
Night, John Boy. Night, Mary Ellen. Night, Elizabeth. Night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.